The shooting range was silent except for the sharp sound of rifles firing again and again. A group of U.S. Marine snipers lay on the ground, fully focused, but nothing was going right. They were some of the most trained men in the military, men who were used to hitting targets from miles away. But today something felt wrong. Every time they pulled the trigger, the bullet missed the center. Some shots didn't even touch the target at all. One sniper shook his head in frustration. Sweat covered his forehead, not because of heat, but because of embarrassment. Another sniper reloaded angrily, blaming the wind, even though there was not even a slight breeze. A third one adjusted his scope again and again, as if the problem was with the rifle, not with him. They were trained to be perfect, but today they were failing again and again. Their commanding officer stood behind them with his arms crossed. He didn't shout, didn't say anything, but the silence felt heavier than anger. The Marines could feel his disappointment without him speaking a word. They knew the rules. A sniper doesn't get excuses. A sniper hits the target no matter the situation. Some of the snipers tried to make jokes to hide their failure. Maybe the targets are moving, one said. Another tried to laugh it off. Maybe the bullets are allergic to bullseyes. But nobody laughed. Deep inside, they all knew the truth. They were missing and they didn't know why. The range was supposed to be a simple routine test. Clear weather, good rifles, perfect conditions. This should have been easy. But sometimes, the easiest days are the ones that expose the biggest weakness, overconfidence. Many of them thought they were already the best, that they didn't need more practice. Now reality was hitting harder than any bullet. One sniper fired again. The shot landed far from the center. He dropped his head on the ground in shame. His teammates didn't even tease him. They were all in the same position, missing shot after shot. The officer finally spoke, in a calm but firm voice. You all know the rules. If you can't hit still targets, how will you hit moving enemies? If you can't control your breath here, how will you do it when your life depends on it? His words were not loud, but they hit harder than a punch. The snipers said nothing. They couldn't. They knew he was right. The officer didn't cancel the practice. He didn't give them a break. He simply said, reset. Try again. And so they did. Again. And again. But the results stayed the same. Miss after miss. It was like the more they tried, the worse it got. Their confidence was slowly breaking. Some of them started blaming the rifles. Some blamed the sunlight. Some blamed pressure. Nobody wanted to admit the real problem. Their skills were not as sharp as they believed. While the Marines struggled, none of them noticed someone watching from a distance. A woman, not in uniform, not carrying a weapon. She stood quietly, almost blending into the background. She wasn't laughing, wasn't judging, just observing. But in this moment, the Marines didn't care. Their pride was hurting too much to notice anything around them. The shooting range, usually a place of confidence and loud victory, had become a ground of silence and self-doubt. The men who once believed they were the best shooters in the world now questioned themselves. One simple training session had exposed something many soldiers fear: weakness. But what they didn't know yet was that this day, this failure, would become the start of something unforgettable. Someone unexpected was about to enter their story. Someone they would never imagine could teach them anything. Someone who would not only hit the target but shatter their pride, in a single shot. They didn't know it yet, but the lesson was coming. And it wasn't coming from a Marine. It was coming from a woman no one took seriously. A woman who, very soon, would do what none of them could. And when she did, the entire base would go silent. That moment was still ahead. But the first step was already happening. The Marines were failing. The target was waiting. And the story was just beginning. The Marines were so busy failing their shots that they didn't notice the woman standing near the edge of the range at first. She wasn't wearing a military uniform, no badges, no rank, no sign that she belonged there. She looked like an ordinary woman. Simple clothes, tied back hair, quiet face. Nothing about her seemed special, nothing looked strong, nothing looked trained. If someone walked past her, they would think she was just a visitor or someone's family member. But she wasn't just passing by. She was watching. Her eyes followed every shot the Marines fired. She noticed how they held the rifle, how they breathed, how they pulled the trigger too fast or too slow. She saw every mistake like she had seen it 100 times before. She wasn't judging them with arrogance. She was observing them with experience. One Marine finally noticed her and elbowed his friend. "Who's that?" he whispered. Another shrugged. "Probably someone lost. Maybe she's waiting for someone." They laughed a little, but not in a mean way. Just confused. Why would a random woman be watching a sniper range? A third Marine joked. "Maybe she wants to learn how to shoot." The others chuckled, not knowing that their joke would soon turn into truth. A truth that would burn their pride. The officer also noticed her. He didn't say anything, but he watched her for a moment. She didn't look scared, bored, or confused. She looked like she understood everything happening in front of her. That was strange. Civilians usually didn't stay long when soldiers were practicing. The sound of gunfire scared them away. But she stayed still, almost calm, like this was nothing new for her. One of the younger snipers waved at her and shouted, "Ma'am, you might want to stand back. This is not a show." His friends laughed again, but she didn't react with fear or anger. She just nodded politely, like she already knew the danger and didn't care. Another Marine joked louder, "Unless she thinks she can shoot better than us." They all laughed, this time with a little ego behind it. They were already embarrassed because they were missing shots, so teasing someone made them feel better. But the woman just smiled. A small, confident smile. Not rude, not proud, just calm. That smile confused them more than anything. Who smiles at a group of frustrated snipers? The Marines didn't know it yet, but the woman wasn't laughing at them. She was smiling because she understood something they didn't. The problem wasn't the rifle or the weather or luck. The problem was their mindset. They were trying too hard to prove they were the best instead of being the best. Still, none of them respected her. Why would they? To them, she was just a normal woman standing in the wrong place, watching something she couldn't possibly understand. She wasn't wearing a uniform, so they assumed she knew nothing about shooting. In their eyes, she didn't belong on a range made for warriors. But one thing about life is true. The most dangerous person is often the one nobody notices. The officer finally walked toward her, not to chase her away, but to understand why she was there. "Ma'am, is someone expecting you here?" he asked politely. She replied softly, "No, I was just watching." He looked at her for a moment longer. Something in her tone made him curious. She didn't speak like a lost visitor. She spoke like someone who had seen this before. The Marines behind them watched the conversation and whispered among themselves. "Who is she? Maybe she's a reporter." "No, reporters don't stand that close." "Maybe she's someone's wife." "Nobody's wife stands like that while guns are firing." They were right. She wasn't a reporter. She wasn't a wife. She wasn't someone random. She was something more, but they didn't know it yet. Then one Marine, half joking, half annoyed, shouted, "You think you can do better, ma'am?" That was the moment everything changed. She turned her head slowly, looked at the sniper who said it, and calmly replied, "Maybe." The range went silent, not because they respected her, but because they thought she was joking. A civilian woman saying she might shoot better than trained snipers? They didn't know whether to laugh or get offended. But the officer didn't laugh. Instead, he spoke the words that shocked them all. "Let her try." The Marines stared at him like he had lost his mind. "Sir, she's just a civilian. Sir, she could hurt herself. Sir, this is a sniper rifle, not a toy." But the officer didn't change his mind. Something in his gut told him this woman wasn't ordinary. And he was right. The woman didn't show fear. She didn't argue. She simply walked toward the rifle, like she had done it 1,000 times before. The Marines still didn't take her seriously, but they were about to, because the person they thought was just a woman was about to hit the target they couldn't, with one perfect shot. And when that shot landed, everything, their pride, their assumptions, their laughter would fall silent. They had no idea, but they were not the ones about to teach. They were the ones about to learn. The woman walked closer to the shooting line, and every Marine's eyes followed her. Some of them looked curious, some amused, and some looked almost offended, as if her presence was an insult to their training. She didn't look nervous at all. No shaking hands, no fast breathing, no awkward steps. She walked with the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. One of the snipers whispered to his friend, "She's really going to try? Does she even know which side of the rifle the bullet comes from?" They laughed, but their laughter was not strong anymore. It was the kind of laugh people make when they're not fully sure of themselves. The officer stood beside her, watching every move she made. He didn't stop her. He didn't warn her. He didn't treat her like someone who didn't belong. He simply waited. There was something about her. Something the Marines still couldn't see, but the officer could sense. The woman looked at the sniper rifle lying on the ground. It was a high-precision weapon, heavy, built for military use. Not something an average person could control easily. One Marine smirked and said under his breath, "She won't even be able to lift it." He was wrong. She picked it up with steady hands. No shaking, no struggle. She handled it like someone who had held many rifles before. The Marines stopped talking. Some of them frowned. Some blinked in confusion. Strong, trained soldiers had complained about the rifle being too heavy after hours of shooting. Yet this woman lifted it like it was nothing new to her. She lay down on the ground in the proper sniper position. Not a single wrong move. Elbows set, legs locked, cheek resting on the stock. I lined perfectly with the scope. She didn't look like someone learning. She looked like someone remembering. The sniper who mocked her earlier suddenly stopped smiling. He had spent years practicing perfect sniper form. Yet this woman, without a uniform, without rank, without permission, was doing it better than most of them. The Marines looked at each other, silently asking the same question. How does she know what she's doing? The woman didn't speak. She didn't brag. She didn't even look at them. She just breathed slowly, like the world around her had disappeared. The noise, the tension, the judgment. None of it touched her. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just doing something she knew well. One Marine tried to joke again, but his voice cracked. Maybe she watched a YouTube tutorial. Nobody laughed this time. The woman adjusted the scope. Only someone with real experience could do it that fast and that accurately. A few Marines exchanged looks. Something was not right. Civilians didn't hold rifles like that. Civilians didn't understand how to align crosshairs, adjust windage, or control breathing. She gently rested her finger on the trigger. Not tight, not nervous, just natural. The officer was now fully sure. This woman had trained before. Maybe not today, maybe not recently, but she had history with a rifle. The Marines, still not fully believing what they were seeing, stood back like they were watching a strange movie. Their pride wouldn't let them admit it, but inside, a small voice was whispering, "What if she actually hits it?" The woman didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any words. Finally, one sniper, still trying to hold onto his ego, said loudly, "All right then, ma'am, show us how it's done." She didn't answer. She just inhaled slowly, held her breath, and prepared to fire. In that exact second, the entire range went silent. No jokes, no whispers, no movements, because the Marines were suddenly aware of a truth they didn't want to admit. This woman wasn't guessing. She knew. She wasn't trying to learn how to shoot. She was about to teach. Nobody said it out loud, but every Marine felt the same thing in their chest. A strange mix of fear, respect, and curiosity. She didn't come to take their place. She came to show them something they'd forgotten. And the real lesson was not in the shot itself. It was in the confidence behind it. Her fingers settled. Her body didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the target. And in that quiet moment before she fired, every Marine on that range suddenly understood. This was no ordinary woman. This was someone who had held a rifle long before they ever wore a uniform. Someone who didn't need rank to earn respect. Someone whose shot was about to change everything. The trigger was ready. The target was waiting. And the Marines, who once laughed, were now holding their breath. Because deep down, they already knew she was going to hit it. And when she did, their world was going to shift. She lay on the ground, the rifle steady in her hands, her eyes focused through the scope. The Marines watched, but this time, there were no jokes, no laughs, no careless comments. Something had changed in the air. The woman wasn't acting like someone trying to prove something. She was acting like someone who had already done this many times before. Her breathing slowed, in calm, controlled, the way real snipers are trained to breathe before they fire. One Marine whispered, almost to himself, "She's doing everything by the book." Another one nodded, "Too perfect. Way too perfect for a random civilian." The woman didn't hear them, or maybe she did, but she didn't care. She tightened her grip slightly, and with the smallest movement of her finger, she pulled the trigger. Bang! The sound echoed across the range. No one blinked. No one moved. A second later, a Marine looked through his binoculars, then froze. "Bullseye," he said quietly. "Perfect shot. Dead center. No wind, no excuses, no luck. Pure skill." The Marines stood there in disbelief. The same target they had missed again and again. She hit it in one try. She didn't shake. She didn't celebrate. She didn't even smile. She just stayed still for a moment, as if confirming her own shot. Some Marines looked embarrassed. Some looked amazed. Some just stared at the target like it had betrayed them. One of them muttered, "No way. That was luck." But they all knew it wasn't luck. The officer didn't look surprised. He only nodded like he had expected this outcome. The woman wasn't done. She adjusted the rifle again, calmly, like she was warming up. No pressure, no fear. She fired a second shot. Bang! Another bullseye. Then a third. Then a fourth. Every single shot landed in the center. Not even a small mistake. Every bullet was a perfect answer to the question the Marines had failed. After the fourth shot, she finally lifted her head and looked at the men who were staring at her like she was something impossible. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't boast, "I'm better than you." She simply handed the rifle back with quiet respect, like a teacher returning a tool after giving a demonstration. The Marine who laughed at her earlier couldn't even meet her eyes. His face was red, not from anger, but from shame. A woman they thought didn't belong on the range had just done what they couldn't, and done it without effort. One of the younger snipers finally broke the silence. Who are you?" The woman didn't answer. Not yet. The officer stepped forward instead. "She is someone who knows this rifle better than most of you," he said. "Someone who has spent years training people like you. Someone who doesn't wear the uniform, but has earned the respect of those who do." The Marines looked at each other in shock. She wasn't just a random woman. She was somebody dangerous, somebody skilled, somebody they never saw coming. The woman didn't smile in pride. She smiled in kindness, the way a mentor does when showing students what they forgot. Her eyes weren't filled with ego, her eyes held experience. Experience they lacked. She stood up slowly and brushed the dust off her clothes. Still calm, still quiet. And now, the range was quiet too, not because of anger but because of respect. The Marines had learned something that day. Strength doesn't always come in a uniform. Skill doesn't always come with rank. And a true shooter doesn't need applause to hit the target. She proved all of that with a single shot. And the moment that bullet hit the bullseye, everything changed. They came to the range as soldiers who believed they were unbeatable. They were now students. And she, the woman they ignored, had just become their teacher. Her first shot didn't just hit the target. It hit their pride. It hit their arrogance. It hit their assumptions. And it shattered all three. The Marines had finally stopped talking. Because for the first time, they had something worth listening to. And she had only just begun to teach. The woman did not walk away after firing those perfect shots. She stayed there, calm and composed, as the Marines tried to understand what had just happened. They were still staring at the target, still trying to believe their eyes. Some of them had trained for years, some had served in real missions, some even believed they were the best shooters in the unit. Yet a woman with no uniform had just beaten all of them without even trying. And that was when the real lesson began. The officer looked at the Marines and said quietly, "You all saw it. No excuses. No wind. No luck. Just skill." His voice was calm, but his words were heavy. He wasn't trying to embarrass them, he was waking them up. The woman kneeled back down beside the rifle, not to shoot again, but to explain. She picked up the scope and showed them how to adjust it properly. She pointed out how even a small mistake in the angle could make the bullet miss the target by inches or even feet. "You're pulling the trigger too hard," she said softly, not accusing, just teaching. "When you force the rifle fights back. Let it be an extension of your body, not something you're trying to control." Her voice was steady, firm, but gentle. She wasn't talking like a soldier giving orders. She was talking like someone who wanted them to succeed. The Marines, who normally never listened to civilians, were now completely silent. No jokes, no ego, no excuses. They watched every move she made like students watching a master. She lay down again and showed them her breathing method. Inhale, hold, exhale slow. Let the shot go when your body is still, not when you're rushing. The Marines realized something. They had been shooting like they were in a competition. She was shooting like she was part of the rifle. That was the difference. One Marine, the same one who joked earlier, finally spoke. But this time with respect in his voice. How did you learn all this?" She paused for a moment before answering. "Years of practice. Years of silence. Years of watching people who thought they already knew everything." That sentence hit them harder than her bullet. Because that was exactly what they were. People who thought they already knew everything. They weren't failing because they lacked talent. They were failing because they stopped learning. She showed them the wind. Not the kind you feel on your face, but the kind that moves a bullet at long range. She told them how every small detail matters. Heartbeat, trigger pressure, even the way they blink. The Marines, who once thought she was a joke, were now nodding like they were absorbing gold. One of them tried again with her tips. He fired. Bang. The shot landed almost at the center, closer than anything he had hit all morning. He looked at her in disbelief. That worked. She smiled. Not a proud smile. A knowing smile. It always works. If you respect the rifle, it will respect you back. Another Marine took his turn, and this time he hit the bullseye. His teammates cheered, not because he proved he was good, but because he proved she was right. Soon every Marine wanted a turn. They were no longer ashamed. They were hungry to learn. And the woman, who arrived as a stranger, was now the most important person on the field. She didn't shout. She didn't show off. She didn't act superior. She just taught. And that made her more powerful than any rank. The officer watched with quiet pride. He knew something the Marines were just learning. Humility is the first step to mastery. The woman finally stood up and said something they would never forget. Shooting is not about strength. It's about patience. You don't fight the target. You understand it. Those words hit deeper than any bullet. Because she wasn't just talking about rifles. She was talking about life. And they knew it. By the time the training ended, the Marines were no longer the same. Their aim was better. Their minds were clearer. And their pride was softer. They had learned something priceless. Sometimes the greatest teacher looks nothing like what you expect. Sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who knows more than everyone else. And sometimes the best shooter in the room is the one who doesn't need a uniform to prove it. The Marines didn't just improve their aim that day. They learned respect. Real respect. The kind that can only be earned by action. And the woman, the one they laughed at, the one they doubted, had just earned it with every shot. She didn't just outshoot them. She outclassed them. And deep inside, every Marine knew they would never forget her. The Marines were still trying to understand how a woman with no rank, no uniform, and no military badge could shoot better than them, better than trained snipers. But soon, the truth came out, and it surprised them even more than her perfect shots. After helping the Marines fix their shooting mistakes, the officer finally decided it was time to let them know who she really was. He didn't announce it loudly. He simply said, "You all deserve to know who's teaching you today." The Marines stood in attention, curious and respectful now. a very different mood than before. The woman stood quietly beside him, her hands behind her back, waiting. The officer looked at his team and said, "Her name is Anna Carter. You don't recognize her because she doesn't wear a uniform anymore. But years ago, she trained some of the best shooters in the world." The Marines looked at her in shock. Trained? She trained snipers? That wasn't the end. She was one of the top long-range competitive shooters in the country, the officer continued. The military hired her as a civilian specialist. She helped shape sniper programs. She taught accuracy, focus, and discipline to soldiers long before most of you ever picked up a rifle. It was like a curtain suddenly lifted. The Marines who once laughed at her now looked at her with wide eyes, not in disbelief, but in respect. So she wasn't a random woman at all. She was a legend they didn't know about. A ghost in the shooting world. Someone who never needed praise, medals, or fame, only precision. One Marine whispered, "She trains soldiers? But she's not even military." The officer nodded. Skill doesn't wear a uniform. Talent doesn't need a rank. The world respects results, and she delivers them every time. The Marines stood still, replaying everything in their minds. The way she picked up the rifle. The way she controlled her breathing. The way she explained things they thought they already knew. It all made sense now. She didn't look like a soldier. She didn't act like one. But she was better than most of them ever would be. Anna finally spoke, but softly, like she wasn't trying to prove anything. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," she said. "I only came to watch. But when I saw your mistakes, I couldn't stay silent. I've seen too many shooters forget the basics, not because they're weak, but because they start believing they already know everything." Her voice was calm, but her words were sharp. "And the moment you stop learning, you stop improving." That line hit all of them, because they knew it was true. They were trained for the battlefield, but this woman had just shown them a battlefield inside themselves, ego versus discipline. Some Marines felt ashamed for how they treated her earlier. Some were grateful. Some felt inspired. But all of them were changed. One of the snipers finally stepped forward and said, "Ma'am, why did you stop? If you're that good, why aren't you still teaching?" She looked at him with a gentle smile. "Because I didn't need to stay in the spotlight to stay skilled," she replied. "Some people chase titles. I just chase perfection. And perfection has no finish line." That answer was not dramatic. It was real. She didn't quit. She simply moved on from the world that needed applause. And now, here she was, back on a range, still better than the best. The Marines realized something powerful in that moment. A true expert never has to shout to be respected. A real master doesn't need people to know her name. Her work speaks louder than her voice ever could. They had spent the morning trying to prove they were great snipers. She had spent a lifetime mastering the art. Quietly. And now, her quiet mastery had humbled a whole team of elite shooters. The Marines didn't just see her as a woman anymore. They saw her as a symbol, a reminder, a lesson. They came in thinking a civilian couldn't teach them anything, but they were wrong. Very, very wrong. Because sometimes the best warrior doesn't wear the uniform, doesn't carry the rank, doesn't need the permission. She just shows up, and the world learns. The Marines would get better after this day. Their skills would improve. Their shots would get sharper. But more than anything, their mindset had changed. And that mattered more than any bullet ever could. Now, they didn't just know her name. They would never forget it. Anna Carter. The woman who didn't miss. The woman who broke their pride and rebuilt their aim. And the lesson she left behind was simple. Respect is not demanded. Respect is earned with every shot that hits the truth. The moment Sarah fired her last shot, everyone around her went silent. The sound of the rifle had stopped, but something else was louder. The shock on every Marine's face. The targets were checked again and again, but there was no mistake. She had hit every single mark with perfect accuracy. Not one shot was off. The Marines who had missed earlier couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Some men who were laughing at her in the beginning now stood frozen, unable to speak. The same soldiers who had made fun of her simple clothes and quiet nature were now staring at her like she was someone from another world. They expected her to fail. They expected her to panic. But she didn't just pass the test. She outperformed trained snipers. Sergeant Miller, who was in charge of the training, walked toward her slowly. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even confused. He was impressed and a little embarrassed. For the first time in years, he had seen something he couldn't explain with rank or experience. He looked at her rifle, then at the targets, then back at her. "Who trained you?" he asked. Sarah didn't smile, didn't show pride, didn't act like a winner. She simply replied, "My father. He taught me everything when I was young." Her voice was calm, but her words hit harder than any bullet. Now the Marines understood. She wasn't just lucky. She was trained. Maybe not in a military school, but in real life. Her father, a former soldier himself, had made her practice shooting in different weather, different distances, and different angles. She learned not to just shoot, but to understand the wind, the pressure, the breath, and the rhythm. One Marine who had doubted her earlier walked up to her. "You shoot better than half the snipers in this camp," he said, still in shock. She didn't react like someone who wanted praise. She just nodded. She didn't come for a medal or applause. She only came to help because someone asked her to. The other soldiers began to gather around her. Questions started flying. "How did you control your breathing? How do you aim so fast? What do you look at first? The target or the scope?" For the first time, she smiled a little. Not because she wanted attention, but because she saw something change. The same men who refused to learn from a woman were now ready to listen. Their ego had been replaced by respect. And then something unexpected happened. Sergeant Miller looked at the group and said, "From today, Sarah will assist in sniper training. Anyone who wants to improve will learn from her." That sentence hit the Marines like a shockwave. A civilian woman, without uniform, without rank, was being asked to teach trained soldiers. It had never happened before. Some were uncomfortable. Some were angry. But most of them knew she earned it. Respect is not given in the military. It is earned through skill, courage, and discipline. And Sarah had all three. She moved toward the practice table and started explaining the basics in a way no one had ever done. She didn't speak like an instructor. She spoke like a person who understood the rifle, like it was part of her. She talked about how the gun is not the main weapon, the mind is. She showed them how to feel the rifle like a heartbeat, how to wait for the right second, how to let the world go silent before taking the shot. One young Marine whispered to his friend, "She's not just shooting, she's teaching us how to think." Even Sergeant Miller stood there, learning quietly. The sun began to set, but not a single Marine left the field. For the first time, the woman they ignored had become the person they trusted the most. And the best part? She didn't need a uniform or a rank. Her accuracy was her identity. Her focus was her power. And slowly, one by one, the Marines began to realize something important. Greatness can come from anywhere. Not just from medals, not just from titles, not just from the military. Sometimes the best shooter in a group of snipers is a simple woman who grew up learning how to aim, not to impress the world, but to master herself. Days passed, and the sniper field slowly began to look different. The same Marines who once stood proudly, believing no one could ever challenge them, were now standing in a line, listening carefully to a woman they once underestimated. Sarah didn't just impress them. She changed something inside them. She didn't speak loudly, didn't act like a commander, and never once showed off. But every time she picked up a rifle, the field went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if it respected her aim. Soon, word spread around the base. Soldiers from other units came just to watch her shoot. Some didn't believe the story. They thought it was exaggerated until they saw Sarah take a perfect shot from a distance most Marines could barely hit even after training. And she did it calmly, without shaking, almost like she was taking a quiet breath. One afternoon, the base commander came to see the person everyone was talking about. He stood behind the group with his arms crossed, watching Sarah explain why patience matters more than speed, why reading the wind matters more than holding the rifle tight, and why ego is a sniper's biggest enemy. The commander expected to see a confident professional. Instead, he saw a humble woman, wearing simple clothes, talking to Marines like a friend, not like a superior. And yet, every Marine around her listened with full attention. No shouting, no orders, no fear, only respect. After she finished her demonstration, the commander walked up to her and said, "You just trained soldiers who refuse to learn from anyone. That's more impressive than your aim." She smiled and said gently, "They were never the problem. They just needed to see something real." That sentence stayed with the commander. Something real. Not medals. Not rank. Not loud speeches. Just true skill and quiet confidence. Before she left, the commander made an announcement in front of everyone. "You came here as a guest, but you're leaving as someone this base will never forget. You showed my men that talent has no uniform. You reminded us that respect is earned, not demanded. And for that, this base thanks you." The Marines, who usually clap only for heroes in uniform, applauded her like she was one of them. Even the ones who doubted her in the beginning stood up straight, giving her the kind of respect usually reserved for decorated snipers. But Sarah didn't stay for praise. She packed her rifle, shook a few hands, and prepared to leave the base quietly, the same way she had arrived. No attention, no trophy, no spotlight. She came to help and she helped. That was enough for her. But something surprising happened. As she was leaving, the young Marine who first mocked her ran up to her. He looked nervous, almost guilty. "Ma'am," he said, "I want to say thank you, and I'm sorry. I judged you before I even saw you shoot." She didn't reply with anger. She just nodded and said, "It's okay. What matters is who you are after you learn the truth." Those words hit him harder than any lecture. Before Sarah stepped out of the gate, she turned back one last time. She saw a full line of Marines, standing tall, saluting her. Not because she was an officer, not because she had a rank, but because in their eyes she earned it. And that moment was more powerful than any medal she could ever receive. When she reached home, her father was sitting on the porch, waiting for her. He looked at her face, and he already knew what had happened. She didn't need to say anything. He just smiled and said, "So, did they finally learn how to shoot?" She laughed for the first time in days. "Yes," she said. "But more than that, they learned how to respect someone without a title." Her father nodded slowly and replied, "Good. A true shooter doesn't aim at the target first. They aim at their own ego." She quietly placed her rifle on the table. Not as a weapon, not as a symbol of pride, but as a reminder that sometimes the strongest warriors are the ones no one expects. And somewhere inside the Marine base, her lesson stayed alive. The Marines didn't just become better shooters. They became better men. And every time they hit a perfect shot, they remembered the day a simple woman walked in and outshot them all.